Emily Harper had barely stepped into the main lobby when a full cup of ice-cold Coca-Cola slammed into her face hard enough to snap her head back, as if she had been punched. Laughter erupted instantly, echoing against the glass ceiling of the Harper and Company New York headquarters, like fireworks exploding over marble. It was her first day, and it took exactly 1 moment for the entire company to decide they could crush someone they believed was nobody. Soda clung to her hair and ran down her collar, soaking through the thin white blouse, until it revealed the outline of the layer beneath. The sweetness of Coke clung to her skin, heavy and suffocating, but Emily did not move. She did not react, did not wipe it away, did not say a word. Tyler Brooks, the privileged intern with gelled hair and a smug smile, shrugged, as if he had merely slipped, tossed the empty cup into the trash, like the end of a cheap performance, and said, "Sorry, thought you were janitorial," drawing out his voice just enough for the crowd to hear, before turning away amid the delighted laughter of a few junior employees swirling their cocktails. Emily tilted her head the slightest bit, a movement so small it looked like nothing, but in her hazel eyes something tightened quick and sharp, like the flash of a blade, the kind only the perceptive would notice. But no one here was perceptive. No one wanted to be. At Harper and Company, belittling people was a luxury everyone enjoyed. The lobby shimmered under neon lights, reflecting across faces, wearing the confidence of people who believed they ruled the world. Behind, Emily's suppressed laughter pricked at her neck like needles. Someone whispered, "Look at her like she crawled out of the basement." Another sneered, "How did HR hire someone like that?" Emily stood before the glass wall overlooking New York, her reflection framed by skyscrapers. Her hair plastered to her neck, her blouse wrinkled, her gray slacks loose and worn like something pulled from the back of a closet. No one knew the blouse had been custom-tailored for her during her years in Paris. No one knew the simple watch on her wrist was a limited edition piece, given by the founder of Harper and Company to his only granddaughter, who was her. No one knew, because Emily had erased every trace of wealth, deliberately shrinking herself down to appear ordinary before walking into this place as a nobody. The European parent company had sent her here with one mission: to observe, to listen, to see the true face of the American branch before she assumed the role of chairwoman. Yet, when that Coke hit her, she was not thinking about power or titles or the future. She thought only one thing: is this the culture I am about to lead? At the far end of the room, Daniel Crawford, the 34-year-old CEO of Harper and Company, was speaking with a group of sales directors. He happened to turn just as he caught sight of Emily from afar, soaked through, and his gaze stopped cold. For a brief second, what flickered across his expression was not pity, but recognition, like he had glimpsed something familiar he could not yet place. The people around him kept talking, unaware that their CEO's attention was locked on the young woman standing in the center of the storm without a single tremor. Emily tightened her grip on her bag strap, her hand shaking for the span of a heartbeat, before steadying again. She did not hurry, did not bow her head, did not avoid a single gaze. Each step was slow, firm, cutting through the murmuring crowd as if none of them could touch her. But inside, she felt the icy sting of soda on her skin, the humiliation rising in her throat, and the deep anger she refused to let spill. She could not break here, not today, not in front of these people. As she walked past Tyler, he let out a small laugh and said, "Stay sharp, intern. This is Harper and Company, not a place for whatever you are." His words sank like wet sand, but Emily did not pause. She did not look at him, did not respond. She simply thought, her mind cold as forged steel. A day will come when this place learns to respect the person it dismissed the most, and that day had only just begun. Emily Harper walked up the steps toward the office wing, the smell of Coca-Cola still clinging to her clothes, each cold, sticky drop reminding her of the moment the entire lobby had laughed in her face. But she did not hide it, did not fix it, did not adjust a single thing. She let the mess show like a silent piece of evidence, forcing the truth of what had just happened to reflect back at the people who had laughed so confidently at someone else's humiliation. The main corridor leading to the elevators gleamed under the cold yellow lights, every click of heels and every snicker slicing through the air like a blade. When Emily pressed the elevator button, a group of account managers approached, led by Brittany Shaw, whose platinum bob was as sharp as a razor, and whose sparkling eyes held the arrogance of someone always favored at every company event. Brittany stepped directly in front of Emily, tilting her head and raising her voice just enough for everyone around to hear. "This elevator is for full staff, not for someone like you." She narrowed her eyes, letting them travel over the soaked clothes and the hair plastered to Emily's neck. "There is a service elevator in the back, exactly where you belong. The smell of trash suits the Coke on you better." Laughter crackled behind her, brittle and poisonous. Emily did not smile. She simply turned her head, slightly, her hazel eyes locking onto Brittany, as if seeing through the polished mask of superiority wrapped around her. Deep, direct, unwavering. In that single moment, Brittany did not understand why she instinctively stepped back half a pace, as if she had brushed against something dangerous that the eye could not see. Emily spoke quietly. "I will take the stairs." Her voice was not loud, but it carried weight and calm and force enough to freeze the laughter around them for the briefest beat. She turned away and walked up the staircase, each step, deliberate, steady, carving into memory the faces of the people she had just passed, all those contemptuous eyes, mocking smiles and words sharp enough to slice through bone. But Emily did not push them out of her mind. She kept them. She remembered all of it. When she reached the mezzanine, the air felt quieter, yet the silence lasted only a few seconds before new whispers rose. Two sales employees leaned against the glass wall and burst into giggles as she passed. "Hey, is that the Coke girl? Oh my God, look at that soaked shirt like she showered under a fire hose. I have no idea why HR hired someone that useless." One lifted his phone to snap a photo, treating her like entertainment. Emily did not turn back, did not respond. But someone behind her noticed. Evelyn Grant, the silver-haired woman standing by the railing, her eyes deep sharp and unblinking. She did not speak, yet a slight tilt of her head, intentional and precise, made the two sales employees fall silent instantly and shove their phones back into their pockets. Evelyn approached Emily, her heels clicking against the floor, in steady warning like beats. She handed Emily a thick folder, its red confidential stamp stark against the cover. From the chairwoman, she murmured her voice low enough that no one else could hear. "You need to review this before the restructuring meeting tonight." A young employee walking by overheard the word chairwoman and spun around eyes wide. "Wait, what? Chairwoman who? Who is she? She is an intern, isn't she?" Panic laced the air, but Evelyn silenced it with one sharp look that made the employee instantly lower their head. Emily took the folder, her hands steady, despite the heaviness of it, a weight that seemed to carry the future of the company. "Thank you," she said, soft but firm enough that Evelyn gave a subtle nod, as if confirming what she already knew, that she had found the right person. Emily walked away, leaving behind confused and uneasy glances from the very people who had mocked her minutes earlier. They did not understand why an intern was holding confidential documents, why senior advisor Evelyn Grant had delivered them personally. What they were about to understand, and what they would pay for, was that Emily's silence was not weakness. It was the first sign of a storm forming. Downstairs, Brittany stood by the railing, watching Emily disappear into the hallway. For a split second, something inside her tightened. Not sympathy, but a premonition, a faint, uneasy feeling that cooled her spine. Something was wrong. And she had no idea that the thing wrong was already rising, ready to sweep through Harper and company, beginning with the very girl they had just mocked like disposable trash. Emily Harper stepped into the pantry during break hour, the bitter smell of coffee mixing with the loud chatter of the marketing team until the small space felt squeezed tight. The moment she reached for the tissue box to wipe the last sticky traces of cola from her blouse, she was immediately blocked by a marketing employee with gel-slicked hair leaning against the counter, his voice deliberately raised as if performing for an audience. "Did you skip the part where this company requires proper attire?" He dragged his eyes up and down her soaked clothes and burst out laughing. "That outfit is pure end-of-season clearance rack." His friends howled. A flash went off as a girl in the group raised her phone to snap a picture of Emily. "Let's post it on the internal group. Caption Intern of the Year, the Failure Edition." Emily stayed still, her fingers tightening around the edge of the tissue until they turned pale. She did not turn her face away, nor did she offer the apology they were waiting to hear. Instead, she lifted her gaze and looked directly at the man laughing in her face. Her eyes were calm, so calm that the whole group faltered for a beat. "Is that all you can say?" she asked, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through his arrogance. The laughter died instantly. The man choked slightly, as if unprepared for anyone to strike back. Emily did not wait for him to recover. She set the tissue down, turned and walked away, leaving behind a silence so stark that his swallow could be heard. Out in the hallway, curious eyes followed her. Two design employees, standing beside the photocopy machine, whispered, "She just walked past the conference room with that red folder. The confidential one. Even senior staff rarely get near it. What kind of intern?" Their voices trailed off as Emily disappeared around the corner, but the confusion lingering behind her hung in the air like dust floating under white lights. Emily continued down the hallway, her flats tapping out soft, steady clicks. But as she neared the staircase, a group of interns gathered there suddenly fell silent, turning toward her as if waiting. A thin boy with a vape pinched between his fingers smirked. "Hey, you dropped this." He crumpled a napkin and tossed it at her feet. "Pick it up, janitor lady." The group erupted in laughter, as if they had invented the cleverest joke in the century. Emily bent down, picked up the napkin without rushing, and slipped it into her coat pocket. When she straightened, her eyes met his, not angry, not wounded, just calm enough to wipe the smirk off his face for half a second. "Thanks for the reminder," she said, her voice so soft that the whole group felt as though they had been slapped by something unseen. No one expected her to be this steady. No one realized that every one of their actions was being quietly witnessed by someone they never noticed. A few steps away, a facilities manager holding a clipboard had paused, his eyes sweeping over each face in the intern group. He said nothing as he wrote several notes beside their names, his lips pressed together, as if swallowing disappointment for an entire generation that no longer respected others. When Emily stepped into the empty conference room, she placed the folder on the long walnut table, polished like glass. The room was so quiet, she could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner. She stood before the large glass window, overlooking the sprawl of New York clouds, drifting slowly across the steel-colored towers. She was no longer thinking about the Coke splashed on her, the mocking laughter, or the disdainful stares. Instead, her mind moved through the numbers, inside the documents, the misconduct, the decayed departments, the leaders manipulating employees, the units running poorly while feeding a toxic culture. She saw it all laid out like a map. She knew she had not been sent here to endure, but to decide who deserved to stay and who needed to be cut from the system entirely. And just as she placed her hand on the table's edge, Brittany Shaw's sharp voice cut through the doorway. "This room is for managers, not trainees." Emily turned, their eyes meeting. Brittany stood there in her striking red dress, her superior smile flickering just slightly, as if she sensed something different, that the woman standing in the conference room was no longer the girl who let a cup of Coke hit her without reaction. "I must have misread the schedule," Emily said, her tone gentle but weighted. Brittany folded her arms, trying to regain her authority. "Right. Do not let it happen again." Emily quietly closed the folder and walked past her. But as she passed, Brittany shivered. She did not know why, but the feeling was real, and she was not wrong. Because in only a few hours, the entire company would be shaken to its core by the very person they believed was the lowest among them. The afternoon moved with a faster, heavier rhythm, as if the entire Harper and Company building were breathing quicker than usual. Emily Harper stepped into the HR area with nothing more in mind than replacing her badge that had gotten wet, but the moment her eyes landed on the announcement board, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The list of new personnel was printed in bold, neat, perfectly aligned columns, and her name was scribbled at the very bottom in cheap pen ink, carelessly added as if she were an afterthought. Next to the board, a young HR staffer, thin, bespectacled, and always wearing a smug smile, leaned against the counter. He noticed her standing in front of the board and immediately walked over his voice, deliberately loud, as if he wanted an audience. "Oh, you are the new intern, right? This list is for actual employees. You do not need to stand here reading it." He pointed at her handwritten name and smirked. This someone must have written it by mistake. No idea why anyone would add you as if you were real staff. A few nearby employees instantly turned around, eager for drama, as if watching a play. Emily touched the edge of the page lightly, her eyes fixed on the handwritten line, not with hurt, but with a cold, observing clarity. The disrespect did not injure her, but the rot in the way things operated chilled her to the bone. The HR staffer stepped in closer, forcing a tone meant to sound authoritative. "Let me take it down, all right. You are not on the list today." And without waiting for her response, he yanked the sheet off the board and folded it theatrically as though performing some grand act of administrative power. But when he moved to toss it into the trash, Emily gently placed her hand on the edge of the paper, stopping him. Her eyes remained soft, but her voice tightened, carrying enough weight to make his chest jolt slightly. "I will keep it." He blinked. "What? I will keep it," Emily repeated slowly, clearly, calmly. The young man's face drained a shade paler, his heartbeat quickening for reasons he could not explain. Around them, a few employees exchanged glances, not because Emily projected authority, but because her composure felt like it had drained some of the air out of the room. At that moment, the inner HR office door opened. A senior manager stepped out, her posture rigid, her face stern, her eyes sharp with caution. She looked at Emily, then at the paper in the young HR employee's hand, and the silence that followed grew heavy enough to press into the walls. In that brief pause, Emily's phone vibrated softly in her pocket. She glanced down at the screen, a call from the European Corporate Legal Department. She left the HR room, still holding the folded paper, and stepped into the quiet hallway. When she answered, the voice on the other end was formal and definitive. "Ms. Harper, we are calling to inform you that the full transfer of shares has been completed. Effective tonight, you officially become the executive chair of Harper & Company United States Division. All leadership authority is now yours." Emily stood still, her hand gripping the folded paper like the final scrap of the invisible life she had just left behind. Her gaze settled on the large glass wall reflecting the entire building, and a quiet thought rose within her. All right, it is time. On the call, the lawyer continued with unmistakable certainty. "We will await your personnel decisions after the restructuring meeting. Best of luck, Chair Harper." When she slipped her phone back into her pocket, she knew she had just crossed a boundary no one in this building even knew existed. At that moment, an older janitor wiping the nearby glass paused and looked at her. His eyes held no curiosity, only the quiet knowing of someone who had seen much and understood more than most people realized. Emily nodded in thanks as he gently adjusted the wet floor sign for her to pass. But across the hall in a small office, the senior HR manager had already lifted her phone, her voice tight with urgency. "I think we have a problem, and we need to inform the executive board immediately." She glanced outside where Emily was walking with a calm expression, but eyes sharpened, with a decision as thin and lethal as a blade. None of them knew that the laughter, the mockery, and the bullying they had enjoyed all day were standing at the edge of being flipped upside down. And Emily Harper, the girl they believed was nothing more than a failed intern, had just become the person holding every one of their futures in her hands. They simply did not know yet. Not yet. But they were about to. Emily Harper walked down the long hallway leading to the strategy room, as if every step she took sent a faint tremor through the entire building. No one knew the transfer of power had been signed that morning. No one knew that the girl they called the intern now had the authority to shut down entire departments with a single signature. And no one knew that in only a few minutes the chaos would begin from the very silence they had dismissed all day. As Emily approached the central office wing, voices and laughter spilled from a conference room left partially open. A group of senior advisors had gathered, preparing for the afternoon huddle. In the middle stood a large man with streaks of gray in his hair, his shirt collar buttoned too tight, wearing the arrogance of someone accustomed to giving orders. This was Aaron Blake, senior strategist, well known in the company for his booming voice and the habit of waving his hands as if everyone owed him gratitude. When he noticed Emily at the doorway, Aaron raised his eyebrows and let out a mocking laugh. "Hey, errand girl, do not stand there looking lost." He pulled a $20 bill from his pocket and dropped it onto the floor like throwing scraps to a pet. "Go get me a latte. Thick foam. And hold it with both hands so you do not spill it." Laughter erupted around the room, each sound landing like a slap against Emily's dignity. Someone whispered, "She is still standing there." Another replied, probably too shocked to move. Emily lowered her eyes briefly toward the bill lying limply on the ground, but instead of picking it up, she lifted her gaze slowly, her eyes locking onto Aaron's with a calm so cold it made every person in the room feel their spine tighten. "I do not drink coffee," she said, her voice steady, almost as if stating a simple fact. What froze the room was not the sentence, but the way she said it. It did not sound like someone being ordered around, nor did it sound like someone intimidated. It was the voice of a person who had never lived beneath anyone. Aaron faltered, thrown off for a moment, but his pride was too inflated to allow him to show it. He barked a louder laugh. "Do you not understand your job? You are a trainee, which means you serve the people above you. I tell you to do something, you do it." Emily did not react. She simply stepped over the bill, leaving it on the floor like a worthless piece of trash, and walked past him. The silence that followed her was so sharp it felt like the air had thinned. No one knew that her refusal had just added another line to an internal report, a line that Evelyn Grant, watching from afar, noted with an icy stare. When Emily turned into the internal network corridor, the late afternoon air felt thick like mist before a storm. She paused by the drink counter and took a small sip of water to steady her breath. But the brief moment of quiet was cut off by a shrill, all too familiar voice. "You do not belong here. It was Kendra Marsh Jr., executive in charge of event personnel lists. She strutted forward, arms crossed, eyes locked on Emily's trainee badge, as if it were a crime. "This is an internal event for management staff. I do not know who let you in, but you need to leave now." People nearby turned to watch, their eyes lighting up, as though anticipating a fight. Emily set her cup down, her hands relaxed. "I will leave," she said softly. But what made Kendra's confidence slip for a second was Emily's look, the way she seemed to see straight through the mask of those who judged without knowing anything. Kendra forced a smug smile. "Good. As long as you know your place." Yet, as Emily walked away, someone else was watching everything. The acting COO stood in the glass office above, witnessing every move. He picked up his phone and typed into the executive group chat. "Carter is here. They do not recognize her." The message sliced through the upper floors like a blade, sending the management teams into sudden panic. They rushed to pull up the internal cameras, and the footage began to play. Emily being splashed with coke. Emily being blocked from the elevator. Emily being mocked. Emily being humiliated in the middle of an event. And when her face appeared clearly on the large screen in the executive command room, someone gasped, their face turning pale. "My God, that is Emily Harper." Meanwhile, downstairs, Emily slipped her bag over her shoulder and stepped into the quiet hallway. She had no idea that people were frantically calling one another, deleting posts, erasing messages, searching for evidence to save themselves, but it was far too late. At the end of the hallway, a sudden gust of wind swept through the glass doors, brushing against Emily's sleeve like a warning. Not for her, but for those about to learn what it meant to stand in the path of a storm named Harper. The large conference room of Harper and Company glowed brightly that night, lit up like a stage waiting for its true lead to walk in, though none of the sharply dressed, document-holding anxious faces inside had any idea that the center of this evening would not be the CEO nor the executive board, but the young woman they had spent the entire day belittling. Emily Harper stood at the end of the hallway, her hand resting on the cold steel door handle, hearing her own heartbeat. That was neither fast nor slow, simply steady and calm, as if she had been prepared for this moment for years. But the stillness inside her was the opposite of the chaos unfolding within the room. Through the narrow gap in the door, she heard frantic whispers. "We have a problem. If that really is Harper, then, oh my God, the cameras recorded everything, all the teasing this afternoon." A woman's voice cracked, and the coke cup fear was spreading like a virus no one could contain. Emily pushed the door open. The room fell into absolute silence. Daniel Crawford, the 34-year-old CEO, stood at the head of the table. His sharp eyes, normally steady from years of commanding boardrooms, flickered when he saw Emily step inside her blouse, still damp, in places her hair loose over her shoulders, her face calm, but her eyes carrying something soft, sharp, and impossible to ignore. The entire table turned toward her at once. Some mouths fell open, some throats tightened. Some faces drained of color as the video footage from earlier played through their minds, and the truth hit them all at the same time. The girl they had insulted was not a nameless intern. She was a Harper descendant of the family that built this company. Daniel stepped away from his chair, his gaze locked on her. Many expected him to scold her for entering the wrong room, or to call security like he always did, with staff who overstepped. But he did something no one could have predicted. Daniel bowed, a deep, clear, unmistakably respectful bow. A ripple of shock spread through the room like someone had dropped a tray of glassware. "This meeting is officially called to order." Daniel set his voice, low, steady, carrying a weight of formality and an edge of fear. He lifted his head, eyes fixed firmly on Emily. "Allow me to introduce the new chair of Harper and Company United States Division, Emily Harper." Several people gasped. One person jolted so hard they dropped their pen on the floor. Another raised a hand to their mouth. Those who had laughed at her now shrank into their chairs like children awaiting punishment. Brittany Shaw, the woman who blocked her at the elevator and mocked her clothes, stood frozen hands curling inward, as if trying to disappear. Even Aaron Blake, the senior strategist, who had thrown a $20 bill at her feet and ordered her to fetch his latte, stared at her now, as if she were a blade hanging above his head. Emily walked into the room and placed her folder on the table, the simple motion enough to make several people flinch. She did not look at anyone directly, yet every gaze in the room clung to her, as if the entire world had shifted. "Before we begin," Emily said, her voice clear, neither rushed nor slow, "I want to thank all of you for a very memorable afternoon." No one dared to breathe. A few lowered their heads in shame. A few stared blankly, already imagining their fate. Emily opened the folder, flipping through the pages with the calm certainty of someone who had seen through the company's polished facade long before this night. "I have reviewed all operational data reports and structural documentation," she said. "And today I also witnessed the true culture of this place." Her voice was gentle, yet carried a weight that made the entire room's spine go cold. Respect should never be a privilege. Daniel watched her with a reverence. He could not hide his eyes, saying what no one dared to speak aloud. They had no idea who they had provoked. Emily continued each word, solidifying the foundation of her authority. "Tonight, I will announce the list of those who will continue forward and those who are no longer suitable for their roles." At the end of the table, Kendra Marsh, the one who forced Emily out of the internal event, clenched her hands until they shook. Brittany gripped the edge of her dress until her knuckles turned white. Aaron Blake closed his eyes as if bracing for execution. But Emily did not argue, did not accuse, did not call out a single name. She simply closed the folder and delivered a single sentence that made every person in the room understand that the time for leniency was over. The doors of Harper & Company remain open, but not for arrogance, disrespect, or the humiliation of others. When Emily lifted her gaze, her eyes swept across the room. No anger, no vengeance, only the look of someone who had endured enough to finally know where she belonged. And in that moment, everyone understood tonight was only the beginning of a storm that would cleanse every corrupted layer Harper & Company had allowed to grow for years. Emily stepped toward the chair at the head of the table, and when she placed her hand on its armrest, no one dared to breathe. The storm had opened its eyes, and it carried the name Harper. When the late-night meeting ended, the news spread faster than any internal announcement the company had ever sent. In just 30 minutes, the entire Harper & Company building knew that the girl who got splashed with Coke was not an anonymous intern at all, but the new chairwoman, the highest authority in the United States division. Rumors shot through every hallway, every office, every elevator like fire racing through dry straw. The people who had laughed at her that morning now curled into their chairs, eyes wide, hearts pounding in panic. Some stood frozen at their keyboards, hands trembling as they hurried to delete photos, videos, even mocking messages from group chats. But the system logs had already saved everything. Nothing could erase the truth. Emily Harper walked out of the conference room without an escort and without a trace of triumph in her expression. She moved like someone quietly gathering the shattered pieces of a building its own people had destroyed. When she passed the pantry, the marketing team from earlier snapped into silence, afraid even to breathe too loudly, in case their fate collapsed on the spot. The man who had taken a photo of her earlier stepped back, hiding his phone like it was evidence of a crime. Emily did not stop, but her eyes passed over them for a fraction of a second, enough to make the man freeze. Not out of fear, but because her gaze held no hatred at all. It simply saw through him as if he had never been important enough to remember. She continued into the main lobby, where employees were still scattering toward the elevators, in utter confusion. The moment they saw her, some stepped aside, some bowed their heads slightly, some stood rigid like statues. No one spoke, but the fear was rising like a tide. In the left corner of the lobby, the young IT employee, the only one who had offered her a tissue after she was splashed with Coke, stood awkwardly clutching his laptop. When she passed, he gave her a timid nod. Emily paused briefly. "Thank you," she said softly, just loud enough for him alone. His eyes widened a mix of shock and emotion, and in that moment, Emily understood that the kind ones, even those who appeared only for seconds, deserved to be remembered more than anyone who held power. She continued toward the large glass doors leading to the terrace. The New York night wind swept in strong but cool, lifting a few strands of hair across her forehead. The city lights reflected against her face, casting a quiet glow that felt like the true form of power. Not loud, not showy, but undeniable. As she stood there, hurried footsteps echoed behind her. Brittany Shaw, her platinum hair slightly disheveled from panic, rushed toward her, her face as white as paper. Ms. Harper. Her voice trembled, stripped of every ounce of arrogance she had displayed earlier. Emily turned. I want to apologize." Brittany stammered, her hands twisted together until her knuckles turned pale. "I did not know, I truly did not know you were, if I were not a Harper." Emily cut in her voice, soft, but leaving no space for excuses. "Would you still apologize?" Brittany froze. The question hit the very center of every excuse she had been about to give. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Any apology would only be another mask. Emily did not look at her again. "An apology does not erase the behavior," Emily said, her tone calm, but each word landing like a decree. "But acknowledging your fault is the only place to begin." A tear slid down Brittany's cheek, but Emily turned away, refusing to let anyone else's emotions dictate her own. At that moment, Daniel Crawford appeared at the end of the hallway, watching quietly from a distance. He did not intervene. He understood that this was the moment Emily reclaimed not just her dignity, but the foundation on which the company's culture would be rebuilt. Bathed in the soft gold of the lobby lights, Daniel walked closer, his voice deep and low with emotion. "They will change." Emily continued looking out at the city, her voice gentle but unwavering. "They will have to change, or they will leave this place." Daniel was silent for a moment, then nodded. "And you?" Emily turned her gaze steady, calm, yet fierce. "I did not come here to be respected. I came to teach them what respect means." And the night wind rose again, as if bowing before the storm taking shape, a storm named Emily Harper. The next morning, Harper and Company felt like a body burning with fever. Every hallway buzzed with whispers, every pair of eyes carried fear, every department sat wound tight like a drawn bow. And at the center of that fever stood Emily Harper, the woman they had called the lowest-ranked intern only yesterday, now the highest authority in the entire division. Emily entered the building through the main doors. No security escort, no grand announcement, just a slim figure in a fresh white blouse and simple gray trousers. Yet with every step she took, the atmosphere parted instinctively around her like water opening before the bow of a ship. Those who once refused to look at her now dipped their heads. Those who mocked her yesterday avoided her eyes as if avoiding a sharpened blade. She passed the reception desk. The receptionist who had said, "You are not on the meeting list," the day before now stood frozen, her face flushing red as if slapped. She bowed so deeply, her hair almost touched the counter. Emily said nothing, just glanced her way. That single glance was enough to make the receptionist feel she was standing at the edge of her career. The cafeteria was as crowded as every morning, but the atmosphere today was suffocatingly different. When Emily stepped inside, whispers died immediately. Even the clink of a spoon against a plate faded away. A group of data analysts who had pushed Emily out of a seat the day before stiffened as she moved toward the water station. The man who had shouted, "This spot is not for someone like you," trembled so hard he dropped his cup. Emily ignored them, picked up a bottle of water, and walked away as if they were nothing more than blurry decorations in the backdrop of her day. But that indifference terrified them more than any warning could. When she passed the creative department, the woman who deliberately knocked over her water bottle yesterday was frantically deleting a social media post, the one mocking the intern dressed like a warehouse worker. She flinched when Emily walked by her face, turning pale, nearly dropping her phone. Chairwoman Harper. She stammered, knees nearly buckling. Emily did not stop. "It would be best," she said softly, "if you focused on the job you are paid to do." One short sentence. Yet the entire creative floor held its breath as if she had issued a verdict. Two finance managers nearby, who had laughed when Emily was mocked, straightened up immediately and held their breath as her eyes swept across the room. Emily did not look at them for long. She did not have to. Their fear completed the rest. When she reached the stairwell, where the interns had blocked her path the day before, that same group now looked like they had died inside. The skinny boy with the vape, the one who had called her janitor lady, backed against the wall, face drained of color, shoving the vape behind his back. Chairwoman, he stuttered, voice cracking. Emily paused for exactly 1 second. "At Harper," she said, her voice firm as steel, "we do not judge people by their position, but by how they treat those with less power." The boy bowed his head, eyes reddening from shame. Emily walked on, and he stood there like someone who had just survived a tidal wave. But not everyone bowed. As Emily passed the HR wing, the door of the HR director's office was left slightly open. Inside, the senior director, who had reported to the executive board the night before, was whispering sharply to an assistant. "I had no idea she returned from Europe. No one told us. No one." Then they saw Emily standing in the doorway. Both froze in place like statues. Emily looked at the HR director, the very woman who once ignored a formal complaint about the toxic culture in the company. "We will meet at 3. Emily said, no explanation, no emotion, just one sentence. And everyone understood. This would not be a meeting. This would be a reckoning. Emily left, making her way toward the entrance of the executive suite. The senior leaders, after a sleepless night, as the truth spread, were waiting with pale, tightened faces. Daniel Crawford, the CEO, stood at the door. The confusion from the previous night was gone. Today, his expression carried a quiet respect, the kind that came from knowing the woman before him had not come to share power, but to rebuild the entire foundation of this company. "Everyone is ready," Daniel said. Emily looked through the glass into the boardroom, where 12 senior executives sat in a straight line, faces drained, bracing themselves like defendants awaiting judgment. "Good," Emily replied, placing her hand on the door handle. "Because today we begin cleaning Harper and Company." And as she pushed the door open, every face inside shifted in color, because they all knew this. It was not just the company being examined. It was the very soul of every person in that room, exposed under the cold white light of truth. When Emily Harper stepped into the executive suite conference room, the air inside was so dense it felt like you could touch its weight. 12 senior executives sat in a long row along the walnut table, their faces stiff, their eyes darting between one another, as if each was waiting to see who would be named first. Daniel Crawford stood beside the chair at the head of the table. He gave Emily a small nod before stepping aside, surrendering the center of power entirely to her. Emily sat down and opened the thick folder before her, the sharp sound of paper hitting the table, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Let us begin," she said, her voice calm, yet carrying enough force to freeze the room in a single breath. The large screen behind her lit up, displaying internal charts, department performance metrics, and a list of workplace culture violations, the very issues past leadership had repeatedly ignored. Harper and Company did not fail because of the market. Emily said, her gaze sweeping across the room. It failed because the people of Harper forgot how to treat one another. One executive swallowed hard, his trembling hands hidden beneath the table. "We will start with the marketing department," Emily continued, and 3 faces instantly drained of color. Footage appeared on the screen clips they had all assumed were insignificant, mocking laughter insults about appearance, the covertly filmed video of Emily being splashed with Coke. "Bullying is not culture," Emily said, enunciating each word. "The 3 individuals involved are suspended immediately pending investigation." One of them shot up from his seat, attempting to defend himself, but Daniel rested a firm hand on his chair and said quietly, "Sit down." The man collapsed into silence. Emily moved on to HR. The HR director's face was pale as chalk. "HR exists to protect employees," Emily said, "not to bury misconduct." She signed the document in front of her. The HR director is removed from her position. Operational authority will temporarily transfer to Evelyn Grant. A soft exhale sounded from the corner of the room, half relief and half despair. When Emily shifted to the intern group, half the room seemed to shrink into their seats. Footage of the boy with the vape throwing a napkin at her feet played on the screen. The entire table sighed, not out of sympathy, but because they knew he had destroyed his future with his own hands. "His internship will be terminated," Emily said. "However, he will be allowed to reapply next year." Several eyebrows lifted in surprise. Emily added, "Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. But young people deserve a chance to correct themselves." It was not softness, it was the fairness she intended to restore. Then came the creative department. Footage of the woman knocking over Emily's water bottle appeared along with her mocking social media post. "This action violates our ethical code," Emily stated, her tone sharp as a knife. "Her contract is terminated." The woman covered her face, shoulders shaking, but no one rose to defend her. As for the remaining departments, Emily did not read out names, but her gaze fixed on them with precision. Being absent from today's list does not make you innocent. Silence in the face of wrongdoing is also a choice. The entire room bowed their heads. No one dared argue. Daniel remained still, eyes locked on Emily, as if witnessing the rise of a force he himself respected deeply. Finally, Emily opened the last slide, "Proposed promotions." And on the screen appeared names no one expected: the young IT employee who handed her a tissue, a receptionist who had been working for only 3 weeks, but treated everyone with kindness, an elderly janitor who greeted everyone with respect, despite being invisible to most. "Harper is not a place for the arrogant to climb," Emily said. "Harper must be a place where the deserving are seen." Then she rose, closing the folder with a soft but decisive motion, and delivered the final line that left the entire room in stunned silence. Starting today, Harper & Company will be rebuilt from the ground up. Not by the intellect of the strongest, but by the integrity of the kindest. And no one in that room dared breathe as Emily walked out, leaving behind a cleansing unlike anything the company had ever witnessed in its history. That afternoon, as the sun dipped behind New York's shimmering glass towers, Emily Harper stepped onto the rooftop of Harper & Company, where the wind blew so fiercely it felt as though it could sweep away every trace of the chaos that had unfolded today. Her hair lifted gently in the gusts, her eyes looking down at the vast city she had just put back into order in her own way, not through shouting, not through loud authority, but with a calm, unshakable resolve that made even the most arrogant people bow their heads. The door behind her opened softly, and Daniel Crawford stepped out. He did not speak loudly, did not disturb the moment. He simply stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on the cold metal railing. "You did what no one before you ever dared to do," he said quietly. "Harper will be different from today onward." Emily did not look at him. She let the silence answer, because that transformation did not begin with the meeting, nor with the firings or promotions. It began the moment she walked into the building and showed everyone that dignity has nothing to do with position, and true strength never belongs to the loudest voice. Under the sunset glow, Emily's face appeared softer, but in her eyes remained an unwavering resolve. "They will learn respect again," she said gently. "If not, they will leave." Daniel nodded. "And are you ready for what this role becomes?" Now, Emily exhaled not in exhaustion, but as if setting down a weight she had been carrying unseen. "I have been ready for a long time. Today is just the first time they finally saw it." The wind swept around her again, carrying with it the chill of the approaching night. But Emily stood steady, the quiet eye of a storm in a world full of turmoil. And in that moment, Harper & Company did not simply have a new chairwoman, it had a new soul. From the perspective of an expert in organizational culture and human behavior, Emily Harper's story stands as one of the strongest reminders of a truth often forgotten in modern corporate environments. Real power does not come from a title, it comes from character. A system may operate with advanced technology and flawless processes, but if its internal culture is decaying, if arrogance outweighs kindness, if mocking laughter becomes the measure of influence, then that organization will eventually collapse from within. Emily did not transform Harper & Company through anger or revenge. She did it through stillness, through unwavering resolve, and by standing firm in the very moments when she was most underestimated. It was her quiet strength that exposed the true nature of the people around her, forcing them to see who they really were when they believed no one was watching. It is a lesson every individual and every organization must remember. The way you treat the weakest person in the room is the clearest reflection of who you are. If this story touched you, hit like to help spread the message of kindness and inner strength. Do not forget to subscribe for more inspiring journeys, where each story reminds us that integrity has never gone out of style. And before you leave, drop a short comment below with the phrase, "Always respect," to remind ourselves that every great change begins with the simplest act.